So the purpose of what we're going to be doing is, like I say, the game that I wrote is called Electric Bastionland, and I've written a great deal about the development of the game on my blog and on Twitter, and we're partway through releasing audio recordings for audio commentaries explaining various sections of the book. But what I wanted to do was, I wanted to do something a bit different, because on those audio commentaries I had some fantastic guests, but you know what guests are like, they want to spend half of the time talking themselves. So this is unadulterated, 100% me, and I'm going to go deep into each page of Electric Bastionland. And there are a good number of pages. This is the first physical copy of the game to exist in its final form. And as you can see, for somebody that claims to write very simple, accessible games, this is a bit of a beast. But as you will see, its beastly nature is more to do with, it's not beastly in terms of rules. It's beastly in terms of the content that's in there and the options that you have. So what I'm going to do is, like I say, we're going to go through this one page at a time. If you have any questions, throw them up in the chat. It would be great to hear from the people who are watching. And I'll try and answer questions about the game as we go. So let's see. So here we are, Electric Bastionland. And one thing that I'm going to do consistently throughout this is I'm going to praise Alex Sorensen, who produced all of the illustrations for the book. And thank you, Ben Han. You are the first person to tell me that you can hear me. I'm assuming that you can also see me, or at least you can now see this beautiful artwork by Alec. So the front cover piece, I always knew that the cover piece, I wanted it to be a scene of Bastion, and what I really wanted to get across was the density of Bastion. And what that means is the sort of the pitch that I went to Alec with for the cover was Where's Wally meets L.S. Lowry, if you are down with either of those references. Where's Waldo for the international market. And those kind of crowd scenes where you can look through a scene and you're sort of, I remember sort of poring over those Where's Wally books when I was younger and just looking for details and trying to find every little hidden joke in there. And my dream was to have something like that for the cover. And I think he's outdone my expectations completely, Alec has, with this cover. It obviously extends to the back as well. And I think there's just a lot of hidden details here, and I think he took that idea of having all the hidden details and the density of ideas and decided to run with it for the rest of the book, because one thing that I'm really looking forward to now is digging into the art and looking at the little details in the background, because there's a lot going on there. Thank you everyone that's telling me that audio and visual is good. I think it doesn't like the sort of big screen of my face, obviously, but I think that's for the best if we stay clear of that. So we're past the cover, just 336 pages to go. So the end papers proved an interesting dilemma here. I really wanted to have something useful on the end papers. So for the unfamiliar, that's the first page you see when you open. It's the inside of the cover. I wanted something useful, but I also wanted something that was going to, I wanted it to be something that someone could see as the first thing they see in the book, and it gets them excited about the book. And having 100 characters, just the faces on the book, on the end papers, I think is a really good way of setting the tone and saying that yes, you might be this little pig guy here. That could be you. You could be this dog. You could be this guy with the mask. And you could be this woman with the frog on her head. These are the kind of characters that you might be, that you might encounter, and this is setting the tone for the world. And in a similar way to the cover, I wanted to get across the idea that Bastion is people. It's its people. Without the people, it's not a living city, and it's not interesting. So focusing on people straight away was something I wanted to do in the end papers. And it also doubles as a nice little random character table. If you need an NPC, you can just grab someone off here and use sort of their basic appearance as a bit of inspiration. And I just think a side benefit is it looks beautiful as well. I think seeing all of his pieces together like this, almost all of them, there wasn't quite room to fit all 106 on this grid, but most of them are there. But seeing them all together really shows what he's done and how he's created this sort of diverse set of characters that are very evocative and all very interesting and all look very different. And that's very much what I wanted in there. So this is a section that I thought was also really important. Again, I didn't want... The whole idea of this project for Electric Bastionland was I wanted a book that was rich in flavour, but not rich in lore, and not rich in setting that you had to learn. I wanted it to be something where you could pick up the tone of it straight away. Sort of like I could give you an elevator pitch and you can run with it, and that's everything you need to know. And that's part of that's to do with making it easy to run, but I also wanted it to be easy for new players to sit down and play, because I've spent a lot of time with this game playing it with brand new players. So I attend a regular club here in Manchester where I live, and in the club there's often people attending who are board gamers, and this club is mostly board game tables, and then there'll be a few tables of people playing role-playing games. And if I go along, I might have a friend or two that are already there, but we'll often put a sign up saying players wanted, and someone will come over and say, yeah, I want to try role-playing games. I've never tried one before, but you know, I know D&D, it looks cool, what have you got here? And I wanted something that I could just read to them, and then I didn't have to tell them anything else. So this sort of poem almost at the front, we decided it was a poem so we could get rid of punctuation entirely. We've got Bastion, the electric hub of mankind, the only city that matters. Deep country, it stretches forever, the long shadow of our past. In the underground, machines undermine reality. Aliens are here from beneath the living stars. You have a failed career, you have a colossal debt. Treasure is your only hope. And what I wanted to do with that is I wanted to set the elements of the world that people needed to know about. So people need to know that there's a city called Bastion, and they needed to know that it was electric. Even they could have got that from the cover. They needed to know that deep country is stuck in the past. They need to know that there are machines underground, there's aliens. The only thing I didn't fit in here is mockeries, but I quite like the surprise of when someone encounters a mockery for the first time, and I can just say, I try and describe it without saying the word Muppet, and it's surprising how many times I do that and someone doesn't get that they're essentially Muppets. So at the table I'll often just describe them as these felt animals that are kind of given life, and they're kind of artificial beings, but then sooner or later it's easy to just say, like, yeah, you know, like a pig Muppet. Imagine a pig Muppet, and that's your mock pig. And the failed career, colossal debt, treasure is your only hope. In 3 lines, I really wanted to get across the core of the game, the driving force of what do you do. So Patrick has asked me a very good question. Why this font? So I'm not a typeface expert like so many people are. So I'm going to hold my hands up and say that this is the first project where I have done the layout entirely by myself. So I did all of the layout work for this. the only edition that I did previously, Into the Odd, that was the layout was all done by somebody else. So what I wanted to do with this one, as part of becoming a more sort of self-sufficient game designer, I wanted to do the layout myself, and I'm hoping that it's just on the right side of looking professional, because there is some extremely fancy layout out there in RPG books, and I wanted to keep things simple, but I also wanted to have a very clear style. So the font, to go back to Patrick's question, font is Gill Sans. One part of the reason I used it is it's the font of the London Underground. In fact, I believe it was designed for the London Underground. So I think, especially in these big block capital uppercase, well, small caps, sorry, titles, I think it looks great, and it really evokes a kind of early 20th century. I think the font itself is closer to sort of post-war in Britain, but it's a very modern font. So the font that we used in Into the Odd was some serif font, and it looked a lot more old-fashioned, a lot more kind of 19th century. I wanted a font that looked 20th century and looked like it was a step forward. Something that looks closer to something you would see today than something you would see in an old Renaissance or medieval or even industrial sort of writing. And I went back and forth there because I do think on the page there's some instances, so things like, I won't go too far into the details, but there's things like when you've got a period and I think an A, even if you have period space A, it doesn't look like there's a space there. It's a very small space, and I was able to resolve that. So it turned out to be a little bit of a clunky font to work with, but I just like the look of it so much that I decided to go through with it. And the one thing I will say is I think it looks, let's have a look in here. I think it looks really good on the printed page. In printed form, it looks fantastic. I'm really happy with how it looks in the book. So yeah, I stand by the decision, but it was definitely a stylistic decision. And in terms of format, just the size of the book. So obviously I should have a copy of Into the Odd with me, but Into the Odd was, this A5, barely thicker than this folded over piece of paper with my shortcuts on. And this is Electric Bastionland by comparison. So it's significantly larger. It's US letter size, which is A4, but a little bit shorter and a little bit wider. And basically the reason is I started doing it A5, but as Patrick himself will know, when you do a very small book that's very thick, like Veins of the Earth, for instance, Veins of the Earth is a stunning book, but I sometimes find that quite difficult to use. I find the format can sometimes fight me a little bit with it being such a thick book in such a small format. Brian, Brain Dead Ned, sorry, is now telling me that Eric Gill was a horrific person. I just assume that everybody is a horrific person, especially if we're talking, any number of decades ago. So me using the Gill font is in no way an endorsement of the person who designed it. But yeah, in terms of the size, I did originally have it at an A5 format, but when I got those failed career spreads in draft, it just didn't work with this, because I wanted big pieces of artwork, and you'll see why when I get to the failed careers, because I wanted to have all those background details, and I wanted them to be like, boof, here's a chunk of the world on the page, and I didn't want to I didn't want the art to get lost in a small format. So it is indulgent, I know that, and I know that it means the book is significantly more expensive than Into the Odd, which was able to be a very small, very light A5 book, and that's why I think they serve different purposes. I think I am glad that the little A5 light book exists, and that might be something I go back to for different games in the future. But for this one, I wanted a big, indulgent, rich book where I could wallow in the setting and let the information breathe on the page. yeah, kerning. I know the word kerning, and I know that kerning has caused me some problems, but I am not good at kerning. Yeah, and there we go. That's the format. So, should we get on with it? So I want. This is one of the last things that I added to the book. Actually, was these kind of chapter prefaces, where you've got just a page with quite large text. Again, this is a choice I've made where this size text, I think this is sort of like, this might even be like 14-point text here in the body, which is quite large for just like body text on a page. But I wanted this to be something that you didn't gloss over. So if you're going to if you're picking the page open and you want to learn, let me start again. If you're picking the book up, you want to learn how to play the game. I don't want you to get to this playing the game section and think, oh, it's one of these what is a role-playing game sections, I'm just going to breeze past it. I wanted it to be something you read because this is different to how other games do it. And like I said, I play this game a lot with people who are brand new to role-playing games. And one of my goals is that they can just sit down and I don't have to sit them down and say, right, I'm now going to tell you the 6 different types of role for this game. So we have talent rolls and we have ability rolls. And oh no, you don't use that number, you use a modifier, so you have to subtract 10 from your number. And if you're doing it in your specialized area, then I didn't want all that. I wanted to just be able to deal with rules as they came up. So I will often explain how saves work. I will say, oh, you've rolled a strength of 14. That's great, because if you're doing something dangerous to do with your strength, you'll need to roll 14 or less. And that's about all I will do to explain saves. And I tend to not bother explaining combat until we get to it. I'll say if you rolled a musket that does D8 damage, I will just say you do D8 damage. So when you're attacking someone with your musket, you'll roll D8, and we'll explain that later. So I wanted to put it right in there, in the rules, that players don't need to learn anything. You can just show up to the game. I'm glad to see we've got Alec with us in the chat. So make sure you ask him any questions you've got about the art. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to answer any and all questions. So the thing is, thing with this section is, I wanted to be careful because I didn't want it to sound sort of loosey-goosey, like, oh, it's your game, you make up the rules as you go along. I wanted there to still be a sense of structure and a sense of continuity in that this is the game, this is how it works. But I just wanted to quickly explain, what it means to be a conductor and why the game is as simple as it is, and get people into the right frame of mind so they're not coming into it expecting a big crunchy rulesy game. Right, before we go on, I'm going to catch up with the chat. Thanks, Patrick, again for saying it looks nice. That's kind words coming from the man himself, the streaming legend that is Patrick Stewart. And I guess Gil is also the font of the BBC logo, which I didn't realise until quite late on. But I think anyone that lives in the UK will know the BBC is an interesting organisation. And I think I chose the name Bastion Broadcasting for this channel as a kind of nod, because I think I've not worked with the BBC myself, but everything I hear about it makes me think it would fit in Bastion very well. It's a very weird organisation, the way that it works. When you try and explain it to people that live in other countries, it's weird because it's like, well, no, it's not state media, but it's publicly funded, and yeah, I think it would fit in Bastion very well. Yeah. Hi, Type 1 Ninja. Good to see you. So, characters. Into the Odd, even back then, I knew what I wanted to have as the first line on the character creation section. And it was, something to the effect of, I can't remember how it was phrased in Into the Odd, but here it's, whatever you were, your debt has forced you to become a treasure hunter. So get on the railroad. Almost. So obviously that's a joke, but I think you can, I don't like to railroad characters in the game, but I think it's perfectly valid to have a starting point that gives some impetus. So in D&D, you will often have the classic problem that 4 different players will create 4 different characters and they have no reason to be together. So maybe you're adventurers and you want to go out and kill monsters and take their stuff, but one of you might be, you know, the classic example is the sort of the loner that doesn't want to join the group, and you might have 2 people that have completely different alignments or completely different philosophies, and they don't feel like they fit together as a group. So the one limitation to your character, I'll get to why there's not so many other limitations later, but the one limitation with your character that I wanted to have is that yes, you are in debt, so you have decided to become a treasure hunter. That is one decision that is out of your hands. You can't show up at the table and say, well, actually, no, I'm not going to be a treasure hunter. I'm going to try and invest my money wisely and get my debt back. Like, no. You are a treasure hunter, because that's the game. It's a game about going and getting treasure. So we get very quickly to one of the first changes from Into the Odd, and that is charisma. So I wrote about this a little bit on my blog. I believe there are a couple of posts relating to what was then called charm, and the idea of having charm as an ability score instead of will. So in Into the Odd, you had your will score. But the problem that I found, there were a number of problems I had with it, but one of the main things was, if you rolled a character with high strength, I could imagine what that looked like, and it was very easy to think, how can I play this character to lean into that fact that they're strong? If you roll a high dexterity, it's easy to imagine what that character looks like. Likewise for low dexterity, and it's easy to think, right, what am I going to do? I've got low dexterity, I'm going to avoid doing anything that requires any kind of grace. Or you could think, I've got high dexterity, I'm going to be all sneaky and stuff. But if you rolled a high will score, it was kind of weird, because will was used for interacting with arcana, which were what oddities were called back then. And they were used for some other things as well. It was kind of all the mental stats piled together. But it was trickier, and especially with new people who were playing the game for the first time. If they rolled strength 8, dex 9, will 15, they were like, right, I don't know what that means. You've got very high will, great. You're very forceful of personality, I guess. So in actuality, it's not really changed that much in how I use it, but the way that it's presented now as charisma is much better, because it's extremely easy to imagine somebody with a very low charisma, and it's very easy to imagine somebody with a very high charisma. And if you roll that charisma 17 character, you know what you're going to do. You're going to try and talk to people, and it drives a certain style of play. And it has that side benefit of, I think, I've not clung on to D&D sacred cows, as you can imagine from looking at the game, but keeping those D&D ability scores, they do hold some weight. They are iconic, unfortunately, for better or worse. So having charisma 18, that means something to someone who only tangentially knows about role-playing games. They might have heard that before. Or saying charisma is my dump stat. These are all memes that have a weight to them. So it's useful to be able to tap into that. Especially here, because this is going to be the first things that you players do. The first thing they do is roll their character. So these are the first 3 things that they're going to interact with. Before they've got their career, before they've got equipment, it's these 3 ability scores. And then the second change, which is very small, and I find it really difficult to stick to this, but in Electric Bastionland, HP stands for hit protection, and it is your ability to avoid being hit. But obviously when I sit down at the table, I still say hit points, because it's such a hard habit to shake. But the official line is that it's hit protection, and obviously that makes a lot more sense with the way that combat works in Electric Bastionland. So again, we've got a few minor changes that, I mean, if I gloss over a change that you're interested in, then let me know and I will go back to it. I'm not going to touch on every single thing because I want to get to the good stuff. Anadaru asks, what if you get 3 18s or 3 3s? Well, that's good, because if you get 3 18s, you'll see what happens when we get to failed career number 90, 94, 93. So a couple of the failed careers are written sort of specifically for somebody rolling awful ability scores, and for somebody rolling extremely good ability scores. So, conductor. And you'll see here, it's the first example of something that you're going to see a lot of, and it's also me breaking that rule. So 3 bullet point lists, something that I find very useful, and I've sort of lent into it as a house style, if you like. And some people like it, some people are very much anti bullet point, but here I've done 2 bullet points on what it means to be the conductor. And again, this is all meant to be very quick and breezing over, so I'll go over the role of the conductor when we get to that section. But yeah, I like that the first 3 bullet point list isn't actually a 3 bullet point list. So debt. So the debt was, I think, if I had to choose one thing that I've added from Into the Odd that I'm most happy with, I think standardizing the idea that you are in debt to begin with it's the most, I found it to be the thing that at the table has the most positive impact right away. And as soon as I started using it, I loved it straight away. So again, being a treasure hunter and wanting to get rich, that was kind of the thing in Into the Odd. There was something there like you want to get rich or die trying. But what does it mean to get rich? So it's like, right, well, am I going to stop when I've earned a certain amount of money? If it doesn't work out, will I just retire my character and go get a job? Whereas here it's like, no, you need to get your money because you're in debt. And it also, as well as driving the play and creating this desperation, it ties the players together because it's a shared debt. And the very fact that it's a shared debt tells you something about the setting. And just the fact that you have a £10,000 debt and it's apparently not that unremarkable, that tells you something about the setting. These are very modern things. These aren't things that you would get in a medieval D&D setting. I don't feel like in Forgotten Realms there's the same sort of idea of people being in debt and certainly having shared debt. And then the rival is the other thing that is kind of the chaser, if you like, the driving factor. So as the rules state, you should roll the rival every single time. But to be completely honest, if I'm running a one-shot and it's a pretty quick game, I don't always roll a rival. But I like to put it there because I wanted to have it there as an option straight away for people. And I think generally it does add to the game to have somebody else who's going after the treasure. People love a character that they can love to hate. And in D&D, the classic example would be the BBEG, the big bad evil guy that you're trying to get to the bottom of the dungeon and kill. But this person is, I guess they're most likely to be a villain. They're certainly an antagonist, but they're not somebody that you can just kill, probably. And again, it sets a tone for the world that your main 2 villains or your main 2 antagonists are your debt holder and your rival. But they're just trying to get by as well. They're not some great evil that needs to be slain. They're in your way and they're making your life difficult. And you can try and kill them if you want to, but it's not assumed that that's what you're doing. So Tukov asks a question, which I'm going to get to, in terms of the spread of the ability, the way that the ability score matrix works on the page on your right there. So we're going to breeze over some of this to get to the good stuff. Lackeys are useful if you are playing with one person. I can't remember who gave me the advice, but the thing that I really like to do is if you've got 1 or 2 players and they roll the characters and they don't have any pets or any servants or anything, give them a couple of lackeys, give them a name, give them a bit of a personality, and they are often a very memorable part of the group. Replacement characters. Again, I wanted to have a little soft penalty for dying. I feel like dying is already a penalty because nobody wants to die, and I didn't write this game for people that are going to game the system. So you could argue that if somebody rolls a bad character, they might deliberately go and die and kill their character. And yeah, you can do that, but I'm not going to design the game to protect that person from ruining the game. I want to design it for a group that's going into the game with the right spirit. But I did want there to be a little bit of a stinger on death. So when a character dies, your debt is increased by £1,000, and your new character that you roll inherits that debt. So it creates a new immediate connection to that new character. The thing I didn't consider about doing the stream was that I was going to have to read names. I previously worked in a previous life. I worked as a secondary school teacher, and I used to hate going into a class I've not taught before and reading the register because I could always mispronounce the names. So I'm just going to go into it. We've got How Quinolo. Is there a reason for not including what happens after paying your debt in the book? Is that up to each group? Yeah, I didn't include what happens after you pay the debt because in my experience, when that happens, the players are usually quite attached to their characters, and enough has usually happened that they've got another kind of driver. So in the equipment list, there's a few things that I've put in there specifically to be like targets for people to reach for after they've paid their debt. So we'll get to that when we get to the equipment page. Sharky8U2. Why is the youngest player as the person who determines the debt holder? It's just a random thing, basically. It's so that if the same group rolls, if 2 different groups roll the same 4 characters, they could potentially end up with a different debt holder. It's just a random factor that doesn't need the roll of dice. And I went for younger because it's much less offensive to be told, oh, I assume you're the youngest person at the table. Whereas I distinctly remember playing this game and somebody saying to me, oh, well, I'm assuming you're not the youngest player, Chris, which was very depressing. But, you know, time will make corpses of us all. Let's catch up with some chat. Did you borrow the idea of the rival from Pokemon? You know what, Captain Catface? And I know who that is. I did not specifically borrow it from Pokemon, but I suspect that was in there definitely, because that's a real good example of a rival in a video game that you hate them, but they're not the end boss. Well, I don't know. I never completed the games. Maybe they are the end boss. And you know, you fight them, but they're not a villain that's there for you to kill. They're an annoying dickhead that's always in your way. So Tukarth asks, is there a big difference in power between the rarer careers and the more common ones? What made you say, okay, this career is a common one and this one is a rare one? So there is tell you what, let's move over to that in a minute when I talk about the failed careers, but I'll explain that when I get to that section. So character growth, this is something I'll go into quite a lot later on, but as the characters become more grizzled and scarred, they become hardier and the oddness of the world starts to rub off on them. So I won't go on the rant about character growth now, but I'm keen on the idea of character growth rather than character advancement. So your character's going to change, they're going to get more options, they're going to get more interesting, they will probably get a little bit more powerful, but they're not on a ladder, they're not working their way up to level 10 so that they can earn greater cleave or learn a 6th level spell. Growth is like your teenage years. You will probably come out the other side better, but it's going to be a rough ride and you probably wouldn't ever choose to go through it. So, failed career matrix. So, I won't go through every bullet point here, but essentially, as you can see, what happens is when you roll your character, you're going to have 3 ability scores. You look up the highest and the lowest score on here. So if I rolled a character with the highest score of 15 and the lowest score of 11. I would look up 15 on the high score, 11 on the low score, and that gives me career number 63. Now the probabilities here vary quite a lot. There is a post about the probabilities on Cave Girl's game blog, and it's called something like Never Tell Me the Odds. But if you search for Cave Girl's blog and you search for Bastionland, you'll see that she has done, Emmy Allen, Cave Girl, she has done a breakdown of this table and what the probabilities are for rolling each of these combinations. And I think roughly that the highest number would be about 3% chance of rolling one, and they tend to be the ones right here in the middle, this sort of little cluster in the middle. I think you stand like a 3% chance, say, of getting each of them, and then at the far corners you've got like 0.01 for some of them, so they're very unlikely to come up. However, what I really recommend, and I wish that I'd sort of put this in as a more firm recommendation, is after you've played the game a few times, if you want to really mix things up and you want to play on like super random mode, roll a d100 instead, because you're going to get all the wild results at the end, and you're going to get some failed careers that you would otherwise struggle to get on the random results. So the ones that are in the middle, which are in the high percentages, they were placed there for a reason. And power is not really a factor, because what I wanted to do is I wanted to give the careers lots of differences, but I didn't want you to get one where you're like, whoa, this one is super powerful. And I also didn't want you to get one where you're like, this one's really weak. I wanted there to be the option to get what I've heard called incomparables. So in D&D, if you've got two fighter-like classes, and one of them gets +2 to attack and one of them gets +1 to attack, and that's everything, then obviously the +2 is a better, more powerful class. But here I wanted to have things that weren't tied to numbers. So there's no failed career that gives you a +3 to your HP, or gives you extra damage when you attack. It's all just weird stuff. And it's very difficult to work out whether a pack of flaming arrows is more useful than a bucket of glue and a bag of marbles, because they are kind of incomparable. And there are some that are more innately physically powerful, so you get better weapons, better armor. But the way the game's set up is very much encouraging people to be creative with their characters. And I wanted to have as many of these abilities as possible where you look at it and you don't think, how powerful is this? You just think, oh, this is a cool thing that I've got and no one else has got. Which is my favourite career. On the audio recordings, I've been asking people their favourites, and there are a few that stand out. I will be going through them all at some point. This is going to be probably more than one episode, this stream. But when we get to the failed careers, I will tell you when I get to one that I think is my favourite. There's a few that I've got a lot of affection for. So the other thing that just before we move on from this page, one of the things that I put into the odd really early on in development was the idea that you are, as an expedition, you have some equipment that you can assume that you've always got. And in this case, in Electric Bastionland, you always have lamps and batteries, climbing and camping equipment, and food and water. And that's because I played so many games of sort of D&D and D&D-like games, where you start with 50 coins or whatever, and you're looking down the equipment list, filling out your character with equipment. And you see things like bedroll, you see things like torches, and what will either happen is you fill up your character with all these essential survival things that you're almost certainly going to need to go into a dungeon. You fill up your bag with all them, and then you get to the adventure and you use them. But if nobody takes them, if everybody thinks I'm not wasting my money on that, and they get to the dungeon and the GM says, right, so the dungeon is pitch dark, who's got a torch? and everyone looks at their sheets and thinks, oh, I didn't buy a torch. No. The two options are either GM sends them back to town and says, well, you got to go buy a torch or go in pitch black. Or he just says, nah, you know what, okay, fine, take the torches. So it just becomes kind of a non-decision. It can be very unsatisfying. I never feel like I've made a great decision by buying torches. So I just wanted to say, forget it. Everybody gets a light source. Everybody gets a way to sleep in the wilderness. And climbing equipment is something that, so things like rope, I just wanted to put them in there because I would assume that you would be taking them. And the same with food and water. I don't want this to be a game about resource management, essentially. It's just not what the focus is. So it's assumed that you've got food and water. So here we have my my magnum opus, my white whale, which is getting all of the rules on one spread. And it actually wasn't that tough. What was tough was getting the wording clear and making sure that things were spaced out so that you could internalize them properly, and that there were examples for things that needed examples. So the rules did all fit on one page pretty well. And in fact, on the back end paper, the rules do all fit on a single page. So once you've read them, once you've read the rules in the book, you've got the end paper for your sort of reference, if you like. And that's got everything that you might need to look up. Although, to be honest, the whole point of the game is that I wanted rules that didn't need to be looked up. Because any time that you have to stop the game to look up a rule, I just don't like it. It's just not what I find enjoyable at the table. I want that time to be spent doing other things. If you're running the game, I don't want you to be thinking about the rules. I want you to be thinking about how to make the situation more interesting. I want you to be thinking about putting character into the world. And I don't want you to be thinking, oh, should I be using slowed or stunned for this effect? And which one's impaired and which one's hindered? And I didn't want all this stuff that you had to then look up. Because when you're looking up, even if it takes you 10 seconds, that's 10 seconds that you could be thinking about something cool to put in the game. So, what I'm not going to do is go over every rule on this page, but what I'd like to do is pick out a few that have been interesting in terms of the development and things that have changed from Into the Odd. So the biggest change, without a doubt, in terms of mechanics, is the way that multiple attackers work. And I agonized over this because it does just make the game more complicated. There's no way around it. In Into the Odd, if 3 of you are attacking one target, and 2 of you have got weapons that cause D6 damage, 1 of you's got a weapon that causes D8 damage, you'd all roll your dice, add them up, and it causes that much damage to the target. It's dead simple. It makes sense. It's kind of how people would expect it to work. It's super intuitive. But the downside is, it made strength in numbers a huge factor. So that combined with the fact that Into the Odd isn't really a game where you have your party of 4 characters fighting off against 6 orcs and an ogre, and these kind of big group combats that you see in D&D. Because it draws a bit more from kind of horror and even like sci-fi elements in terms of its monster design, it's much more common for there to be like 1 or 2 monsters that are much more powerful than the players and that are very weird abilities. But what this means is you end up with all the characters being able to pile on with their damage, and even if you make the monster really strong and powerful, they can't stand up to it because the numbers are just too big. And the amount of times I would see a monster just get wiped out in one turn before it got to do its cool thing. And it also went the other way as well, where if a character did get rushed by, let's say, 3 wolves, and they were out in the wilderness and these 3 wolves come and start attacking them, they could go from being completely full health to instant death in one turn. And that's fine, but I like my combat to be quick, but not too quick. And the system has very fast combat. Every time someone attacks, generally you're causing damage. But it's also quite difficult now for the combat to end in one turn, for the most part, because I wanted it to be that decision point in the middle of combat. So now what happens is, if you've got those 3 characters attacking at once, with 2 of them rolling d6 and 1 of them rolling d8, they all roll together and they take the single highest die. So it's a little bit more, it's one more thing to explain, which I don't like, but what it means is you throttle down combat ever so slightly, just in terms of those wham instant kills. They're kind of now softened a lot. And the side effect of that is also that I like that it sometimes frees up characters to do other things. So in that case where you've got a d8 and then 2d6 characters, they might think, well, all 3 of us attacking this target is overkill. One of us should go and get these innocents to safety, or one of us should run ahead and make sure there's nobody in the next room. And it frees you up a little bit. It's not all a case of like, right, everybody pile on, let's generate the biggest, highest numbers we can, and whack, 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 whack. So yeah, the new ganging up rules, that's why they're there. And they were probably the most controversial element. But I would say if you are dubious about it, give it a try. And then the other rule that I went around this so many times, and anybody that's in the Bastionland Discord server will know it's become something of a running joke about the initiative system. And I hesitate to even call it an initiative system, because all it is one reference here to initiative. So Synesthete says initiative as deck save. Interesting. This is the rule that I've heard most people kind of misinterpreting. So it's under this section here about turns, and on their side's turn each individual can move and perform one action. When it is unclear which combat side should act first, each character must pass a deck save to be able to act before the opponents. So I like having all the characters act at the same time. So if it's the character's turn, the player's turn, then they all have to come up with a plan and then they act in the order that they want to do. I don't like individual initiative. I don't think it adds enough for how much complexity it adds. But what I wanted was the idea that this is just for situations where it's in doubt who's going to act first. Normally I'd let the players go first, but if a monster gets the drop on the group, then they have to make a dexterity save, and only those that pass get to act on the first turn, basically. So if we've got it's even in the example of play, so I'm not going to give an example, it's on the next page. But I see this rule getting misinterpreted, and people sort of overcomplicate it almost, and I think that's just because most initiative systems are much more complex than this. But yeah, it really is just there to be more of a surprise system, so that if you're surprised, you've got to pass a dexterity save, or else you effectively miss the first turn. So Oddsbod, who's Alec Sorensen, is there anything specific you wanted character death to be or not be in the game, especially regarding combat? Compared to the binary of 5th edition D&D, characters almost never die and don't really face consequences for risky combat, versus old school dungeon crawling revolving door of death, never get invested in your character. So what I wanted with combat is, I wanted things to be decisive. So you can die. Because in D&D what happens is, in my experience of playing 5th edition, I've had some good times because I've played with some great people playing 5th edition, but I just don't like the system. I find that it's the opposite of decisive. It can be a slog, and you're chipping away at a target with small amounts of damage, or you're doing very minor effects that are very carefully written to not be too impactful. And you've got monsters that are chipping away at you, and you've got lots of ways to recover. 1 second. Oh, that was 50 minutes without a drink. I need to drink more if we're going to be doing this more regularly. So, decisive combat. Rather than that kind of chipping away effect of D&D, I wanted things to be fast. So if something hits you hard, it might knock you down straight away. So you might lose all your HP, lose a bit of your strength, and get thrown to the ground and take critical damage, and you are dying. And that's the key. I like it when characters are dying, because it creates an interesting emergency situation. It creates a crisis where that character is now dying. We need to get them out of there. And if they do manage to get that character out, then it's very easy to get them back on their feet. You can pull them up. So what's it say? They just need to be tended to by an ally. So I imagine them splashing water on their face, picking them up and saying, come on, let's get out of here. And so as a result, it's quite difficult to die, actually. But what can happen is if everybody takes critical damage and everybody is dying, then you get the whole total party kill, the wipeout. And I think it's more common to get the whole group wiped out than it is for individual characters to die, unless the character is being extremely reckless. So people often look at this game and think it's a super deadly game, but I think I've got it about right in terms of the deadliness. I feel like there is a good balance there of you can die, but only if you act in a way that's putting your life at risk. So, in terms of other big changes from Into the Odd, there's a couple of little things that are just it's just standardizing a few things, like blast damage. That was kind of dealt with just on a case-by-case basis in Into the Odd, but now there's like a standardized rule for blast weapons. I've actually removed quite a few rules from Into the Odd. So in Into the Odd, there were long rests and short rests, whereas now, a rest is just what you do to get your HP back. But if you want to get any strength that you've lost back, so if you've lost strength from taking damage, then you need to go to a doctor or a specialist. And again, that's there to get them to get involved with the world. It's to drive them to find characters and build relationships. Anna Daru asks, what are you drinking? Coconut rum and beef stock? No, unfortunately it is decaf coffee, and it's actually quite cold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drink this coffee right now. You can enjoy this. Yeah, that was a very lukewarm coffee. So let's get back to where we were. So yeah, I did remove some rules, like I said. So the resting rules are simplified. One of the other things that changed is I changed the word arcana to oddities, because one of my things is I really tried to have, and I think I've succeeded here, of having no made up words. All the words that I use, even for elements of the setting, are real words. So bastion is a real word. And oddities are a real word. You don't have to learn that they're called some fantasy mashup of letters. And the main shift, when I changed the name Arcana to Oddities, what I also did was I wanted to think about how they were designed. And Arcana were very much designed to be replacements for spells, and a lot of them were actually based on D&D spells. But for Oddities, I wanted to go a little bit more freeform, and the thing that I removed was Into the Odd, you could make a will save to sort of bend the purpose of an arcanum. So if you had an arcanum that was something that could make you invisible, it's a really boring example, but say an invisibility ring, you could make a will save to try and get it to do something else. So maybe you could argue like, right, well, I want it to make me immaterial so I can pass through a wall. And if you make that save, then you can do it. But I found that was a little bit too vague, and it was creating situations where they almost became too useful because you could use it for too many different things. And I wanted oddities to be oddities. More than being inspired by D&D spells, they were really inspired by the D&D artifacts. So things like the portable hole, and the immovable rod, and the decanter of endless water. All of these things that operate outside of the rules. So if I tell you that a portable hole is a you can open up like a hole in reality and you can put stuff in there, and I can't remember how it works. What happens when it goes in the hole? But an immovable rod is a better example, because you when you put the rod in place and you press the button, it fixes itself in space and it can't be moved. And I don't need to explain any of the rules of D&D for you to understand why that's cool. And straight away, the first time you hear about that, you're thinking, oh, well, here's what I do with that. So Odyssey were really inspired by that, and I wanted there to be lots of items like that in there that were kind of more specific in their use, and it makes it a little bit more self-balancing. And I also didn't like that having them linked to the will ability score in Into the Odd meant that if you rolled a low will score, you were sort of being nudged away from using them. They were like, oh, well, we've got a character with will 16. Let's give her all of the arcana that we find, and she can be the arcana user. And that's not what I wanted. I wanted everybody to have access to this. Sort of like everybody can be a wizard. Everybody can have access to all this weird stuff that breaks the game. And again, one of the things that I keep going back to, and it's one of the ways that I use to sell the game to people, because I'm really bad with elevator pitches. I just kind of throw weird specific things at people when I'm at like conventions. And one of the things that I use is like, so you might get a weird item to start with, so you could start the game with essentially a portal gun. And I don't think there's many games where you could do that. So another example of something that's kind of a thing that's been standardized is bulky items. So Into the Odd didn't have a encumbrance system at all. And Bastionland sort of kind of has one. I don't write the game for people that are trying to break the game. I write it for people assuming that they are going into it in good faith. So if you tell me that you want your character to pick up, you're in a library, and you say, well, there's no encumbrance system, so I'll just take every book in this library and take it with me. And you say, well, there's no rule that says that I can't do that. Then I will explain to you that that's not how the game works. There still has to be, your actions have to make sense. There's no rule that says you can't jump into the sun. But unless you've got the boots of sun jumping, you're not doing it. So I didn't want to put an encumbrance system in there to manage ridiculous examples like that. What I wanted to have something that would create interesting decisions. So bulky items are anything that needs two hands to carry generally, and you can carry two of them without any problem. So the classic example is, you imagine you're holding a big two-handed hammer in your hands, and you've got a long spear on your back. If I asked you to then carry a big heavy box, you're going to struggle, because you've got your back's full and your hands are full. So you're effectively reduced to 0 HP because you're not able to defend yourself. And what it does is it just creates a bit more of an interesting decision where you can't just load up on every weapon in the game. And you have to make a decision to wear armor, because cheap armor is bulky and shields are bulky. And it just creates a few more decisions that you have to make regarding your loadout, I guess. I think you could argue you could take this out of the game and it wouldn't suffer for it, as long as you're going to play by common sense. But it was simple enough that I thought this is fine. And I think those are most of the changes. I can't remember if the structure and vehicles rules were different. It really annoys me. It really bugs me that detachments and structures and vehicles take up all this chunk here, when really they are like, originally they were on like a second spread of like modular rules, but I didn't have that many modular rules, so I ended up just putting them in here. But it annoys me a little bit that they're there, because I think for the most part they're only going to come up very rarely. Like I say, it's not a game about well, if you want to make it a game about dueling tanks, then go for it. And there are certainly fighting machines in here. And then the other thing that I added in, which was arguably, I wouldn't say it adds the complexity at all, but what I wanted to do was I wanted to put some flavour into these rules. And the big inspiration here is pretty obvious for anyone that's played a lot of role-playing games, and that is Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Because when I got that book, it was like the first proper RPG book that I owned, and all of these injury tables that would have all these crazy things happen to your character if they took a critical injury. They were just so exciting. It was like I wanted my character to get injured almost just to see what happens. It was so much more exciting than just you die when you hit 0 HP. But I didn't want to have that death spiral where you get chipped away with injuries and you're getting weaker and weaker. So what I've gone for instead with these scars is these are pretty much there just for flavour and to drive interesting situations. So if you get taken to exactly 0 HP, you're still up and fighting, but you're out of HP, so it's a pretty dangerous situation, and you're going to get a scar. And some of them are just outright bad. So you look up the amount of damage that was caused. So if you took 5 damage and it took you to 0 HP, then you go to number 5, and it's a bloody mess. So you are deprived until you get your stitches done. And deprived is something I didn't mention actually. Deprived is another one that is actually a new rule. I forgot this was an addition because I've used it for so long. So deprived is a good kind of overall catch-all for you're obviously being deprived of something. You've not had a good night's sleep. You've been out in the cold without a coat. You've not eaten for a few days. You've not had water all day. And it means you can't regain your HP. So it's a pretty bad situation. It makes you want to fix that. So you're not going to die of starvation, but you might die because you are starving and you're not able to fight effectively and defend yourself against danger. Because nobody wants their character to die of starvation, really. It's not cool. And not everything has to be cool, but I also don't want things to be lame. And dying to hunger, it's not what this game is about. It's great when it happens in Oregon Trail. And there are games that focus on that. Things like Torchburner, I believe, has that sort of focus on resource management, but it's just not what this game is. It's an exploration and treasure hunting game first, and resource management is a tiny part of it. But the second part of this bloody mess result that we just rolled is you get to re-roll your maximum HP on 2d6 and keep the result if higher. So if you had 5 HP originally, you could be jumping right up to 12 HP, and all because you got this bloody mess. So when you have your character now with 10 HP, say, you can look at this big row of stitches you've got down your chest, and you can say, this is how I earned those HP. It's with the scar. And generally, for the most part, other than Battle Scar, which is kind of the most simple one, which is the result for number 1, where you just get a nasty scar, usually everything else that lets you re-roll your HP, it's going to give you a gradual increase, but it also drives you to do something. So for Shaken Nerves, you need to take something to calm your nerves, after which you can get more HP. Punctured Organ is you are at massive risk of dying. So next time you take critical damage, you're not just dying, you're dead. So you are more fragile, but if you can survive and get back, you will come out of it stronger. And as you get higher up, obviously you're not going to be able to get these results until your character has more HP in the first place, because if your character only has 7 HP, there's no way for them to take 9 damage and get dropped down to 0. So these kind of top results are a bit more radical because they are based on the assumption that this is a character that's been around for a while. And what that means is I could get a little bit more crazy with them. So the top one, Doomed to Die, basically puts you in a situation where the next time you make a save against critical damage, if you fail it, you die horribly. But if you pass it, you remove the effect and you get more HP. So it's kind of all or nothing. Like, are you gonna take this character? It's like a kind of Final Destination thing where your life flashes before your eyes and you narrowly avoided death. And it's like, this character is going to either die or come out of this as a genuinely impressive hero almost. And yeah, they were just meant to be flavourful and give you sort of interesting situations rather than being ways to grind your character down. So let me just catch up on some of these questions. John Harper, all the language is great. Good. Oh, I'm reading this out of order. I thought it was just a general comment on my language. Yeah, John Harper loved the change to oddities. Oh yeah, the British touch of having public hospitals. I mean, it is British, but it's also... I wanted Bastion to be full of bureaucracy and confusion, but I also didn't want it to be grim. It's not a dystopia. It's got its problems, and it can be a very frustrating city to live in, but it's not some grim, dark dystopia. So leaning into the kind of the bureaucratic side of socialism, if you like, made a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense with all this, the idea that there's a governing body for everything. And although there's not a centralised government, there's just lots of councils and boards that are interfering with things. It's not a political comment. I won't go into my own views. But it's there because it feels like a good fit for what I wanted the city to be. I didn't want it to just be you're under the thumb of a dictator. I wanted it to be a slightly different twist on a city. So, Gooskar said that an interesting thing that they've encountered is that after receiving an oddity or two, the failed career aspect of the character is slightly swept under the rug, and characters are more defined by their items and otherwise the same. Does your experience differ? So, this is very much by design, so I'm glad that that worked, because what I wanted the failed career to be was a starting point for your character. So it's not like in D&D where if you choose to be a cleric in D&D, you're probably thinking, well, what kind of cleric will I be in 10 levels time? I'll be like a mega super cleric. And that's not the way that it works here. If you rolled that if your failed career was that you were a squid bagger, then after playing the game for 6 months, you're not going to be... The goal isn't to be the best squid bagger in the world. You failed at that. That's gone. So your character is going to grow out of that. It's why I sort of... In fact, we'll get to that when we get to the failed career section. Oh, if we get to the failed career section today, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if we're going to get there today, because we've probably got about 50 minutes left, maybe, before I have to start thinking about stopping. And we might have to save the failed careers for next time. But, in fact... Anna Drew says, more hitchhikers than 40k for the tone. Yes, exactly. Hitchhiker's Guide, Discworld, big influences. So the example of play, I'm not going to go into this because it's not that interesting to talk about. It is what it is. And I've tried to fit in the rules that I think were most difficult to get written clearly. So... The initiative system is in there, like I said. The whole multiple attackers system is in there. And it's also a nice way to be able to slip in some setting. So the fact that they're fighting some weird wiry machine creature in the underground, it tells you something straight away about the game. So, equipment. So in it, it's not actually changed that much from Into the Odd, to be honest. You've got your weapon categories rather than a list of weapons. So I don't need to write a list telling you about why 6 different types of pistol are slightly different. Or how a sword is different to an axe. Because, like I say, it's just not that type of game. It's not a game about optimizing your combat loadout. You know, D&D is about that. So in D&D it matters that an axe is different than a sword. But here, it's... I wanted to have broad categories, but I also wanted to put lots of flavour in there. So the examples that I chose for each of the categories was very specific. So the fact that the first weapon listed in the crude weapons is a street gun tells you something about the world. And again, pitchfork, felling axe. And then the rest are kind of quite straightforward, but the ones that I'm especially happy with are in the noble weapons. that you've got electric baton, and I don't need to explain to you what that is. It's just there. In power weapons, you've got chainsaw, you've got whale gun. Again, it sets the tone. And shock guns and support guns. These were things that I added in because the thing that I was missing from earlier versions of the game, I was missing things at the higher end that you could spend money on. Missing expensive things. And again, it's not a game about combat gear necessarily, but I wanted to have the option in there for really cool combat stuff to spend money on if you did want to go down that route. So if you want to equip your whole party with flamethrowers, you can do that. And it'll be pretty effective in certain situations. But they are expensive. £1,000 is a lot of money. Armour was changed slightly. Into the Odd, you only had two types of armour. You had shield armour and modern armour, it was called. So modern armour is the same, but shield armour was... So modern armour had armour 1, but shield armour had armour 1, but you needed to carry a shield for it to be effective. And that was a nice, quick way of doing it, but it did create situations where it's like, well, so I'm wearing my shield armour, but I lose my shield. What have I got? Or if I'm already wearing modern armour and I pick up a shield. So I just gave in and put the shield on there as +1 armour. So you can make your character even more survivable than they were in Into the Odd now. You can get up to armour 2. And you might think a shield is not very modern, is it? But the fact that it's there tells you that there are still people using shields. So in Bastion it might be more like a riot shield, or those huge shields that they kind of rest crossbows on. But out in Deep Country, yeah, there's still people using shields because Deep Country's backwards. Explosives, I've expanded this again because it fits in the setting. Let's breeze through some of this. Again, things like food, I really agonised over what to put on here. I tried to pick things that felt very suitable for the setting. So yes, you've got beer and your drinks, but you've also got cocktail and punch bowl. And the fact that you've got these tools down here really sets, if you're struggling to work out what feels right for the technology level in Bastionland, the correct answer is that it's your version of Bastionland, so do what you want. But here you can see modern tools include things like a portable fan or a gramophone or an electric lamp. And cutting edge tools are camera, slide projector and rudimentary thinking machine. So these things do exist, but they are cutting edge. So it gives you an idea of where we're sitting in terms of technology level. Let's catch up on some questions while we're looking at this. So John Harper, he's talked to a couple of people who've had some trouble imagining a typical session of Bastionland. I have my own answers to that. Do you have a short elevator pitch for the kind of description of an adventure? So, in Into the Odd, I wanted it to be self-contained, so there is an adventure in there ready to go. I decided not to do that for this book because I wanted this to be the book that teaches you to make your own adventure. And I felt like if I put a starter adventure in there, it's like having the stabilizers on the bike. I just wanted to rip them off and say, look, no, you're going to come up with your own thing. But I did want to have something I could point to and say, this is like your equivalent to a starter adventure. And I put that on the blog recently. It's called Prison of the Worm Queen, in a very shameless reference to another dungeon about serpents, even though it shares no similarities in terms of structure. And that is a good starter adventure that kind of establishes what it might look like to have an adventure in Bastion. It has Bastion, it has the underground, it has mockeries, it has machines. It sets the tone, and it shows you what you can do with the setting. So then you've got animals and servants and mercenaries. I don't need to go into all this. The thing that's more interesting is the specialist services. So like we've discussed a little bit, I said that I wanted to have free healthcare, but you could pay to get a quick fix. So as the characters get richer, they're probably going to decide they're too good for the public healthcare and they want to go private, which I think is interesting. Prosthetics, wheelchairs and other aids always have a poor quality free option, or you can pay £1,000 for something comfortable and functional. Again, I wanted to make it clear that if you lose your leg on an adventure, it's not like Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay where you lose a leg and you're -2 to this and -4 to that. No, you're going to be fine. Get a prosthetic, and you know, people who use prosthetics are able to function perfectly fine. You are going to do that as well, and I wanted that to be in there. So, as well as restoring strength and dexterity in hospital, if you lose charisma, then you need to spend some leisure time, which can be free, which I'm assuming is visiting parks and botanical gardens, or you can pay £100 for some instant gratification, and I think we know which ones our players are more likely to do. And the experimental improvement course is a weird one. Permanently reroll 1 ability score using 3d6, keeping the result whether higher or lower, no refunds. So it's a big investment. It's the only reliable way to change an ability score in the game. That you're not going to get stronger just by adventuring. And the reason it's there is I wanted to throw a bone to the player that rolled really badly on their ability scores but managed to get that character to survive, and maybe they've got a few scars so they've got some more HP. Maybe they're an interesting developed character but they're stuck with these low ability scores. So I wanted to give them a way to, if you rolled 5 strength, you might send your character on this because you're probably going to come out with something better than 5. So I don't think of it as something that people are going to use a lot, but it's there as an option for people who want to give their character a second chance at a decent ability score. And I just think it's funny as well because you might come out with 3 strength and that tells a story in itself. Or you might go from having 5 strength to coming out with 18 strength. And suddenly everybody's like, what was this experimental improvement course that you went on and gained? You know, you're now this peak physical specimen. And then we've got more equipment. Again, most of which is the kind of what to do when your characters have paid off the debt. So, will they get tempted to buy a waxwork replica of themselves for £10,000 and have it placed in a museum? I know I would. And it also doubles as a nice little, you know, say you've raided a mansion and you've stolen a load of jewellery. Gives you an idea how much you might be able to sell the jewellery for. And this is mostly world building as well. So the fact that you can buy a radio station, do I expect many characters to buy a radio station for £10,000? It'd be great if they did, but it just tells you that this is a luxury thing. So if you come across a wealthy person who is a wealthy sort of villain, maybe they own a radio station and they're manipulating people that way. And then at the ultimate top end, prototype machinery for £100,000, you can have whatever you want. And yeah, it's game breaking and it's silly, but it's fun. And then fighting machines. Again, I keep pointing to various things and saying, this is my only indulgence. This is the only silly thing that I allowed myself to have. But it turns out I've put lots of silly things in here. And having, like, essentially, I mean, when I hear fighting machine, I think of War of the Worlds and the sort of the big tripod striders. Alec has gone for a more humanoid look here, but yeah, I wanted it to be effectively like, I mean, it doesn't say that they're walking mechs, but the fact that it's charger and crawler suggests to me that they're moving on limbs. And cruiser is amphibious, so I'm imagining a cruiser is basically like a big super heavy tank that can also function as a boat, or a ship rather. Yeah, they're a silly indulgence, but I thought it was fun to put them in there. So our next section is failed careers. I'm going to take a short 30-second break and then I'm going to tell you about the failed career section. Okay, so, oh, we're too far ahead. Failed careers. Like I say, when I decided to make the majority of the book into failed careers, so, all of the front of the book is failed careers. Over half of the book. I think it comes to about 2/3. I wanted to have an explanation for why I've done that, because people would think it was wasteful. There was some concern when I spoke to a few people. They thought it was giving too much space to something that would only be used once. But this is the world. That's what I wanted to get across. I'm not going to give you a chapter of the book explaining the city of Bastion in rigorous detail. But if you read over 4 or 5 of these careers and you look at the artwork especially, you'll get a sense of what it's like to live in Bastion. So a couple of things that I wanted to really point out were that the failed career is your past. So if you rolled a machine whisperer, that doesn't mean that you have to continue to work with machines. You might hate machines. If you rolled a human union member, so somebody who believes in human superiority, you might have abandoned that cause. That might just be a part of your past. And as I spoke about a little bit earlier on, this is a starting point for your character. This isn't something that's going to be determining how you play your character in the future. It's a spark. It's a starting point. So it's also this front page, I think, is really important. I really hope people do read it, because it just tells you what it means for the players to get a failed career and what it means for the conductor to use this section. So we'll go through a few of the failed careers. I think we've got time. See if we can get through 10. So the first of the failed careers, number 1. And you'll notice on these first few, if I can go back to the table, for numbers 1 through 7, these are all characters that have a highest ability score is 9 or less, and their lowest ability score might even be 3. So to get this first career, you need to roll 3 for your lowest score and 9 for your highest score, which is a pretty dire set of rolls. So you're going to be really bad at something, and even the thing that you're best at, you're not going to be good at it. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to have something that represented that. So you have a character that is obviously, they are literally the bottom of the barrel in a mechanical sense and in a sense of the setting. You were a gutter minder, whatever that means. So this character is lying in the gutter, and whatever being a gutter minder involved, they're doing it. So you couldn't even succeed at living in the gutter. But what I didn't want, and this is the same philosophy as I did with the starting packages in Into the Odd. I wanted, if you rolled a really bad set of scores, I wanted you to get something really cool. So it's not cool to be a gutter minder, obviously. That's an embarrassing past. But you are going to get something quite effective. And you'll notice the first few careers, almost all of them get some kind of oddity. So the other thing is that the sample names, I think I've mentioned this in the audio commentaries, the sample names are mostly based on something. But I wrote these a number of years ago, I think, to be honest. I think the sample names I did quite early on. And normally they are linked to something to do with the failed career. But what I didn't want to just use the word that was a reference. I changed it. So I'd either change the first letter of it or jumble the letters around a bit. And as a result, I now can't remember what most of them are. So if you're able to work that out for yourself, then I'd appreciate to know where these come from. So, with these failed careers, wherever possible, I wanted it to be that even if you rolled the same failed career twice, you get something a bit different. So, yeah, there are 106 failed careers, but even if you're in a group with 2 gutter minders, they're going to be quite different. And here you can see every failed career gets some stuff for free. So you get your stick hook and you get some rags. And it's kind of setting the tone because, yeah, I don't tell you what stick hook is. You have to work that out for yourself. And then what happened to you is just some flavour. You don't get anything else because, look at you. You're not going to be carrying much stuff around. So it's you just add to your tragic backstory. Basically, it's just laying more badness on top of your history. But then the interesting part of this one is, what are you hiding under your rags? So yes, you are destitute, bottom of the barrel, but you have something cool. And I tried to put 6 of the ones that I really liked in this one because I knew that people would be flicking to number 1 to see, oh, what's the first failed career? So I wanted to set the tone. So Wish Tonic. Wish as a spell in D&D is something that gets brought up all the time as though it's broken, don't give your players a wish spell, but I think it's great. And yes, it will usually change a game in a huge way, but this is what role-playing games are all about. You can't use a wish spell in a computer role-playing game. And and I'm aware that there are games like NetHack and stuff where yes, you can get a wish and you can type in what you want for the wish, but usually you're just wishing for an item or you're wishing for an ability score to be increased. But there's no other medium where you can actually come up with that wish and the person that's running the game will actually make it real. So I wanted to have wishes in there as something you could get at character creation. You might end up with 3 wishes, but whatever you get, it only lasts as long as the bracing kick of the liquor. So yes, you can wish for, you could wish to be the most powerful being that's ever existed, but it's only going to last for a couple of turns. Then you've got things like dehydrated beasts, which obviously inspired by those dinosaurs that you throw in water and they expand to a not much bigger than the original size. Berserker Gland. Things like this, I like having oddities that aren't just an item. So earlier on I was talking about an invisibility ring and how that's a really lame, boring example. So an oddity might not be a ring, it might be a gland, it might be something that is in you. And again, I don't explain it. I don't say this gland is an internal oddity and you can't remove it. Like if you say, can I remove this berserker gland and transplant it onto another character, the conductor's going to have to come up with something there. But it's a good example of something that would, in D&D, this would be a class ability. So it's the Barbarian's Rage, basically. And you don't have to miss out on all these cool ideas. So if you really like the idea of a character that has this rage-like ability, make it an oddity. And if you want to have a weird ability from your favourite D&D weird class, make it an oddity and put it in the game. And a lot of these oddities here are the same sort of thing where they just operate outside the rules. They're not that the Berserker Gland is quite a mechanical one because it's giving you bonuses to your damage. But then you've got things like the Parallel Shifter, which is you put an object inside the box, you shake it, and then there's like a 1 in 3 chance that it destroys it. You get just a cosmetic change, or it makes a better version. And I think there's a couple of items in here that are inspired by Red Dwarf, and I can't remember whether this one was specifically inspired by I want to say Angels and Demons. There's an episode of Red Dwarf where they create a machine that can split an item into a good version and a bad version of it. And then Caged Biter. So again, I think it's setting the tone that I can just say a bug monkey creature and it's up to you to work that out. You better get good at making up stuff if you're going to run the game. And it sounds a bit harsh, but it will make a better game. If you get better at making up cool things and answering questions like, what does my bug monkey look like? Then you'll run a better game and your players will have more fun. So, an interesting thing about this career in particular. Originally, it was called the Gutter Wretch. And it was just effectively you're on the bottom of the barrel. It didn't really link to a career. And not all of the failed careers are careers. But wherever possible, I've tried to make them things that you actually were. It was a failed career. So an obvious example is mockery. One of the failed careers is that you can be a mockery, but it's not, it's not a career. You are a mockery. It's a type of being. So there are exceptions, but for the most part, I try to change it to an actual career. So rather than just being a gutter wretch, because it felt a bit like I was just saying, like, yeah, you were a homeless person, which didn't feel quite right. I wanted to make it an actual career. It's a very low status career, and it's not a career that's gonna be something that you aspire to be, but it is a career. And the fact that it exists in Bastion, it raises questions. Why do people want their gutters minded? Why would somebody pay someone to sit in a gutter and make sure nobody interferes with it? Who knows? Yeah, Alec, wish for more wish tonic. I feel like, yeah, I suppose you could do that technically, but it's only going to last. Yeah, you'd have to be quick. You'd have to get people set up in a row, like when they do those record-breaking shots where all these people in a row do a Jaeger bomb. You'd have to have people lined up ready to drink their wish tonic. Yeah, if you want to do that, go for it. And this is, again, it's an example of, I didn't want to write, if you read the D&D wish spell, it's like a number of paragraphs long because it has to say, well, you can't do this, you can't do this, here's the things you can do with a wish. And that's not how wishes work in like fiction. Sometimes there's rules about what you can wish for, but normally it's like you can wish for anything, that's the point. Shame81. What was the first career you designed, and how did you get from a classical warrior, thief, and mage to these? So in Into the Odd, which, in case people don't know, Into the Odd was the precursor to this game about 5 years ago. And it's the same system, but it was a much smaller book, much more humble. And in there, you didn't get a failed career, but what you got was a starter package. So it was just equipment. So you might have got a musket, a hound, and a fancy hat. And that suggests something about your character. If you've got a hound and a musket, to me, I immediately think, well, you might be some upper class person that's the hound is used for hunting. But I didn't put that out there. That was for the player to decide themselves and to interpret. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to stick with that kind of broad appeal, not broad appeal, but not pin you down into being something forever. So that's why they ended up as failed careers. And I guess I never started with the classical warrior, thief, and mage because, like I say, I was taking a lot of inspiration from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, which was a careers-based system. So you wouldn't be a soldier. You wouldn't be a fighter, but you might be a mercenary or a bandit or a like a tavern brawler or something. It was something specific. And I wanted to channel that because it just tells you a lot more about the world than just being a thief. If you're a footpad or a counterfeiter or a charlatan, it tells you more about the world than just being a thief. So I was already thinking specific things like that, but then I just moved into the idea of, well, let's make them crazy. Let's make them things that you wouldn't get in any other game. I can't remember which one was first. I think what I originally did was I did have some ideas that I just put in a list of like, these are failed careers that I want to put in there. And I think some of them just started as words. So I think I said that taxidermy, I just put in as a word, I just put taxidermist. And then I probably had counterfeit as another word, I put them two together and I'm like, well, counterfeit taxidermist. And then some of them kind of wrote themselves. So I knew that I wanted the number one to be something very pathetic. So putting them in the gutter, right at the bottom of the barrel, it just kind of came out naturally. So yeah, that's the Gutterminder. Oh, the artwork. What I'm going to do is I'm going to if I see something in the artwork that I think is really clever, I'm going to point it out. And then if Alec is still in the chat, he can explain in lots of detail about how brilliant an artist he is and how he came with his vision. But one of the things that I like about this is I asked him to put, obviously when I was describing Bastion to him, I said, like, you know, it's this huge city and there's industrial elements to it, and everything's like built on top of each other and everything's shared. But one thing that I wanted to make sure that didn't get lost, and I'm really glad that he got this, is that nature exists in the city. So it's easy to miss, but if you go into a big city, there's nature everywhere. Obviously you've got like trees and stuff that's there deliberately, but then on a most basic level, you've got pigeons everywhere, you've got moss growing on walls. I was like, take that and let's expand it out. So I want random animals in the background that you wouldn't expect to see in a city. I want to see plants growing. And even here, you've got a nice little bit of vine growing up this pipe here. And just little details like that I really like. So Roger asks if I've ever heard of Maelstrom RPG by Alexander Scott. Is that the it came in a sort of small like paperback format? If so, I remember buying like a used copy, and I found it kind of interesting because it was a very, very early RPG, and it's feels very much like the work of one person, and it goes into lots of detail on things that you wouldn't expect to go into detail. It's like got a huge section on like herbs and stuff, but it's an interesting book. I don't remember much about the system or the setting, if I'm being completely honest. I think it's based in like a historical setting, maybe. So the Curiosity Compiler. Again, the theme that you'll notice on these first sets of careers is I knew that they were all going to get an oddity. I knew that they were going to have a powerful item, so there had to be a reason why. So for the Gutter Minder, it's not explained why they got this item, but you're hiding it under your rags. So it's like your one cool thing. For the Curiosity Compiler, again, what I wanted these characters to do is, even if you don't roll this as your character, if you're running a game, you can look at this and you can draw on it for NPCs. So a Curiosity Compiler is a fantastic NPC to have in your game. Whether you're buying curiosities or selling. And I like, oh, hang on, Alec has just chimed in. Oh yeah, there is. So speaking of just random animals, we have a proboscis monkey here, just hanging out, looking at this poor guy. So yeah, he definitely got it. He got the memo about random animals. So Curiosity Compiler, like I say, it's a cool character to get, but you're going to end up with, again, remember, you're going to have low ability scores. So you're going to be a somewhat fragile character, but you're going to have this cool hook that you are somebody that knows a lot about curiosities. So it's a good example of how I've done knowledge skills here. So my general principle with knowledge is if the players ask a smart question, give them a useful answer. So I don't like making players roll to find out if they know something. So if they think to ask a question that would really help them get to the bottom of a mystery that they're currently dealing with, I would either give them the answer or at least push them in the right direction and say like, oh, well, you've thought of that and now you know that this other person would probably know about this. But I did want the odd character to have some sort of type of knowledge, internal knowledge to them. So here you have a character that knows everything about a specific subject. So you know everything about jewelry, or everything about desserts, or everything about flowers. It might be completely useless, but if I rolled a character that knew everything about desserts, I would find a way to make it useful. And then the oddities here are, again, under a similar theme of the Gutter Minder. If anybody gets the reference that Mechanobertha is making, I will be amazed, because I barely remember this myself. But Mechanobertha is a reference to something I barely remember from my childhood. So it's a heavy shoebox-sized machine. You can put in paper instructions, a coin with a £10 payment, and then after an hour it produces the item. It's like a crappy 3D printer, I guess. And yeah, Powder Sack is another one that's obviously inspired by the decanter of endless water. You can make a pouch of endless sand. Somebody asked me about putting gold dust in there. Yeah, okay, cool, I guess. But if you make a decanter of endless gold dust, I think you're going to create a lot of problems for yourself as well. And then the one that's in the one that made it into the actual artwork. Because what I asked Alec to do, and what he's generally done for the most part, is I've said, you know, for each of the characters, look at what they might get and try and represent one of the actual characters you might get in the game. So he's obviously drawn here the mammoth mask. So it's just a mask with a prehensile trunk rather. So yeah, some would argue that's not all that useful, but yeah, you've got a big cool elephant mask. And the thing that I like about this artwork is this is a great example of what I'm really happy with about what Alec's done here. And if you look in the background, you've got these levels. So you've got a street, and then above that you've got another street, and you've got a bus or a lorry driving over it. And one of the big inspirations for how I wanted Bastion to look, I wanted lots of verticality. And a big inspiration was the old Necromunda miniature game, which is sort of set in this hive city where everything is vertical. And I wanted there to be all these levels. I wanted it to have lots of sense of verticality, and he's really nailed it here. And just the fact that it doesn't make much sense, like the fact that he's on this weird balcony hanging down from like a hatch. I just love the questions that it raises. I did a blog post about it called Question-Based Art, and I think it raises lots of cool questions. Trench Conscript. This one was in there pretty early, and I think it was one of the first ones that I put in there after thinking about the time shift for the setting. So Electric Bastionland Into the Odd was very much based in a kind of industrial era. It was implied to be happening around the world having its industrial revolution. So people were starting to move from the country to the big city, and machinery was starting to take over from people. But I decided to move things forward to a more electric era, more early 20th century. And what could be more early 20th century than getting conscripted to go fight in some trenches? So this is a very on-the-nose reference that was there to kind of establish the time period, rough time period of the setting. And the sample names here is one of the few references that I actually remember. So you've got Cariana, Jops, Galea, and Jules. And these are references to two different things, two different sets of references. Prize to anybody that can pick them out. So Cariana and Galea are one, and Jops and Jules are another one. So we've got our first example as well of something that is a recurring theme throughout these failed careers, and that's gum. So I wrote a list of 100 different gum flavours because it's not just there to be silly. It is just a silly flavour of gum, and I like the idea that there is a kind of collection element to it. So I created this list of 100 different gum flavours and different brands, and the idea that people would try and swap them felt very modern. But the other thing reason that I put gum in there, if you go back to the equipment list, you'll see that under pack of gum, it notes that it's a strong adhesive, because I wanted any character with gum, I wanted them at some point to use that gum to stick something to something else, because it's just that potential for hijinks and potential for creating creative solutions to problems by sticking things together with chewing gum. So it's in there as a bit of flavour, no pun intended, but it's also there as a little bit of a tool for you to use. So again, I've written these careers under the assumption that if two people roll the same career, then you would re-roll. So you wouldn't have two trench conscripts in the same group. But if you play this one week and then next week you go to a different game, and maybe another player that is brand new to the game rolls a trench conscript, and you had a trench conscript on your last game, I wanted them to feel different. So they're not so different that you could have a group of 4 trench conscripts, because I think that'd feel a little bit like you were missing out on something. But if you rolled a trench conscript that was an engineer, so you had £1, so you get some trench bombs, and your thing that you found in the tunnel was an essence extractor, which basically lets you extract the consciousness of a pacified or willing being, and you can inject it into another corpse. That's very different. If you were an engineer with this essence extractor, that's very different to if you rolled a breacher that has an explosive rocket with a phase mole as their pet, which is a little mole that can phase into your body. So they're not so different that you could have a whole group of trench conscripts, but they're different enough that if you play in 3 different games and they've all got different people with this failed career, they're going to be a bit different. So Alec is chiming in with some of his insight. So yeah, one of the bits of art direction that I gave him was that it should almost always be something overhead, and the sky should feel crowded. So yeah, I thought about saying like you can never see the sky because there's always something over you, but I didn't want it to be that oppressive. But yeah, there's almost always something overhead. And if you're ever in the middle of a really dense city, you know, it's quite hard sometimes to get a clear view of the sky. And I wanted to get that idea and sort of just have verticality in there as well, because it's just an interesting element to have in the game. The Debt Squeezer. I feel like these names, Hooper, Keith, Doric, Pontiac, I really wish I'd thought about what these were. But again, we're getting into a common theme in these sorts of careers is to give you something kind of unrelated to the career. So yeah, you're a debt squeezer. So you've got a hammer and a gun, and you've got something you've stolen from a debtor. So that's related to your career. But one of the things I wanted to get across is that people are always more than their careers. So just because you're a debt squeezer and you sort of shut people down for the money that they owed your boss, that doesn't mean that's everything about you. So what did you do to unwind after a horrible task? And it could be that you have a decent singing voice, and we've got more gum, or you can do impressions, or you have a pen name and some connections in the printing industry. We'd all like some connections in the printing industry, that's for sure. And some of them are just bad. So again, you've got an example here of what I tried to do with the hit points, especially. Hit points. I've said it. Hit points. Hit protection. What I tried to do with the hit protection that you rolled. Generally, if you rolled lower HP, you get a better thing here to make up for it. But if you rolled high, you generally get something less good. Because having 6 HP is just outright much better than having 1 HP. I'd even say having high HP is better than having a high ability score in some cases, because HP is almost always going to come into play at some point. So yeah, the bank pig, I mean, it's a shame because I love the bank pig, but yeah, it's a bit less useful than say the bear jelly, which will scare off small creatures but attract large mammals. I mean, I say that, it's these incomparables. I did try to do sort of this loose balancing, but it's so hard to say whether a piggy bank that can come to life is more or less useful than a pot of soil that can make things grow quickly. So yeah, it's very difficult. Captain Catface,
Thank you for the comments. Much appreciated. I am listening to your comments. Captain Catface says, love the squirrels in the background. Where are the squirrels in the background? Ah, yeah. On the trench conscript, I forgot. These slightly sinister squirrels coming out of this cave. And again, there's so much stuff in these pieces that I didn't notice first time round. Because when Alec would send me the art, obviously I was waiting for like 100 odd pieces of art. So he'd send me like a batch and I'd go through, put it in the layout, and I'd be like, yeah, looks great, next one, looks great, next one. And I just check it, make sure it fits. And I got hung up on like the foreground, but I missed so many things like those squirrels. And again, you've got cat in the background, just for Captain Catface there. And in fact, I think, is this our first, not quite our first example of spot colour, but spot colour was a stretch goal. So we only realised we were going to have spot colour into the Kickstarter, after which Alec had already started working on a lot of the art. So a lot of the pieces were probably designed before spot colour was truly considered. I know that we'd spoken about it, but I hadn't decided on what the colour was going to be honest, when I put the stretch goal up on the Kickstarter. But then this idea of doing yellow kind of came to me, because it's an obvious thing, because it's the colour of electricity. But I think the yellow works really well. It works very well in combination with the black and white. And I think black, white and yellow looks very modern. It looks very 20th century. But it also looks, it kind of captures something I wanted to put in there, which is this idea of a spark of hope. So it's not a grim setting, but most people are having quite a difficult life. But there might just be a little bit of light in there. And yeah, this kind of yellow fits as the kind of little bits of light in the world. But not everybody gets one. I think about maybe 20, 30 of the careers have spot colour. So not everybody gets their spark of hope, unfortunately. Dead Shoresman. So I think this probably came from a stupid thing where I always find longshoresman as a funny name for a career, and I never really understood. I still don't fully understand what a longshoresman is, but it's a very interesting career. And one of the problems here is I tried to make these all gender neutral as best I can, but this one has slipped through the net. Dead Shoresman. You could argue it's still gender neutral, but yeah. But what I wanted here was, I did like the idea that not all of the failed careers were just mundane. Some of them were fantastical. And I wanted some of them to be, if you rolled it and you got it, you'd look at it, and then you'd look at it again a second time, you'd be like, what? Is this what I think it is? Is it saying that I died and I came back? And the place that I went when I died is a physical place, so I just came back. And that kind of confusion fits the character here, because nobody believes you. And everybody you once knew is long gone. So you've come back to the city, everything's changed. Nobody believes that you just rode back from the land of the dead. And maybe you didn't. But what you do get in your equipment is cold blood. And I don't tell you what that means. Does it mean that you're like a lizard and you need to sit in the sun to get your metabolism going? Or is it literally that you're like cold-blooded and you don't sort of feel emotion? And that's for you to describe. Yeah, so Alec says in the comments about the yellow. Yeah, using it for the electric lights was obviously part of it, but things like the fire in the agricultural saboteur. Yeah, making sure that wasn't coloured. Yeah, keeping Deep Country. One of the ones I find really interesting is most of Deep Country is portrayed as black and white and just grayscale, because it's meant to look old-fashioned. But there's one, I think it's the Deep Country, the Rural Tax Collector, where you've got this yellow sky. And I really like that one because it tells you something that you never see this yellow sky in Bastion. you know, maybe there's too much smoke, too much light pollution, but whatever this yellow sky represents in deep country, it's like when you go out somewhere really remote and the sky looks completely different. So, these names, I've got no idea what these come from. The debt holder here is a reference to a blog post that I did a long time ago. King Halfwin of Shambly Hall. You're all branded as property of this deep country king. So it's a good example of what I tried to do with the debt holder is I wanted them to give the whole group something to bind them together and also to change the way the group feels. So you're always going to be treasure hunters and you're always going to be in debt, but you might have something different about you each time. So in this case, yeah, you've got a relationship with this deep country king. So maybe you're already going into deep country for the adventure, but it sort of drives you towards there because if you get all the money, you're going to have to go out to deep country. And what does it mean that he's a deep country king? You know, the name Shambly Hall and the fact that he's King Halfwin tells you something. So some of the items here. This one was written quite early on because I remember writing these ones before I was getting a real sense of what... I remember when I came back to edit them, they really needed tidying up because they were written in a bit of a clunky way. But it's a good example, again, of incomparables. The fact that you have no need for sleep and cannot sleep even if you try. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? But one of the ones that's interesting is we've got one of the first references to the living stars. So what do you barely remember about your background? So you don't remember much about your past life, but maybe it involved the living stars. And you have a 50% chance to know any language that you encounter. And the living stars are just referenced and they're left very open to interpretation. And that's deliberate because I wanted to have a bit of... I'm stealing this from I spoke about this with on one of the audio commentaries, and it's this idea of negative design space basically, and having room to put things that are completely off the wall. You could put them in the living stars because I don't really define much about it. All you really know is that aliens come from there, and you know, characters sometimes have a little bit of a connection to the living stars. Captain Catface obviously knows what a longshoreman is. I believe he's done a bit of work on docks himself, or in the family, I don't know. Cool. So again, we're dealing with characters that have a cool oddity, and that's going to be sort of the theme for the first few. So, the criminal bureaucrat. I like this one a lot. It's... oh no, it's not. I was very kindly given a gift of 9 of these, 9 of the first pieces of art that I had that came through from Alec. Was just before Christmas, and my partner and proofreader on this project, Sarah, she gave me this as a Christmas present in a frame, and I thought I had this one in there, but I've not. But it's one of the first pieces of artwork that came through, and I was really impressed with what Alec was able to do with the background here. So the main character looks great, obviously, but I said for background characters, I said like make them big, wide, small, thin, but not just to a human level. Like I don't just want a tall human. Make people really weird shapes and give them weird silhouettes. So you've got, you know, you've got like little small figures like this where it's not entirely sure what that's meant to be. And I spoke a bit about this with Alec, and I think he had maybe more mundane ideas for them than me. So when I see a little short figure like that, I think like, oh, is there some kind of alien under there, or maybe a mockery? But you know, it could just be a person that's that height. And then you've got people with like a square head in the background, and again, it just raises questions. And that's what I love about it, because if you're flicking through this book, you might see this guy with a box for a head in the background, and you might think, I'm going to use that as the next NPC that I need. It's going to be this guy.
So, again, the criminal bureaucrat, it very much tells you something about the world, that this exists. That the laws of Bastion are written so that every crime has a loophole, so you can perform legal crimes if you know what you're doing. And I remember the names here. These names are based on famous solicitors that got people off for crimes. So there's like the Mr. Loophole guy. There's some... They're loosely based on the surnames of solicitors or lawyers from famous cases. So that's where they came from. And then you've got, again, we're kind of following the same format where you've got a speciality within your career and you've got an oddity that gives you something cool outside it. We've not got long left. I'll see if I can get through to number 10. It seems like a good stopping point. Sanctioned Executioner. The thing that I think is interesting about this one is, again, it tells you something about the setting that you can have a killing license. 1 person per day, non-transferable. So you can kill 1 person per day legally. That's pretty significant. And we've got an issue here that has been raised by... It's fine here because when you see smart arm, you know, it's an intelligent arm as in a weapon. But I use the word smart quite a lot to mean smart clothes. Like the 3 or 4 instances where I do it, and I hadn't realised that that doesn't really translate outside of British English, the idea of smart clothes or having a smart appearance. So there's been quite a few times people have misinterpreted that as the idea that, oh, somebody has smart clothes. What does that mean? Does it mean they've got intelligent clothes? Or is it like clothes that have like electronics in them? So I love the fact that they've interpreted that way, but that's very much not what I meant. But if that's how you interpret it, then run with it 100%. And one of the ones I like in here, again, we're getting the Red Dwarf references coming thick and fast. Stick eye, a glass eye on a stick that you can see through. I'm sure that was inspired by Red Dwarf, with Crichton taking his eye out and sticking it on his hand. But you've got another example of what I like to do with the oddities, where you've got things that break the rules and things that you couldn't have in a video game. So Time Tonic, which sends you out of sync with reality for about 10 seconds, so you can act for 10 seconds and then it snaps back in time. And in fact, the video game reference is a bad analogy there, because you absolutely can do that in video games where you kind of rewind time, but it's not something that I see used in role-playing games very often. And I think it's something that's a bit scary to use because it almost seems too powerful. But I think as a one-use tonic, it's great because you have to choose to use the tonic before you take action. And it's just got so many uses you can think of. It's not something that's got one set use. Shaman 81. So the living stars will always stay this mystical, or are you going to elaborate a bit more about it in the future? Do you have a more concrete idea about how to use it in your games? I am going to do something with the living stars in the future, yes. I am. And that's all I will say for now. And that's not me being coy, that's me not having a plan yet. But I do want to do something with the living stars. I think I've joked about Intergalactic Bastionland enough now that people have probably heard it. But whether I actually go ahead with that as a full-on project, I don't know. But I would like to do something that looks at what does it mean? What does space mean in Bastionland? Because it's not going to be the same as what space means in D&D. And it's absolutely not going to be the same as what space means in a proper sci-fi like setting, like Eclipse Phase or something like that. I'm not imagining science fiction. I'm still imagining staying in this kind of weird fiction area, but I would like to explore the idea of space a bit more. So the Fringe Investigator has a great example in the artwork of something that I really love, which is, again, animals. So it's a thing. We've got a friendly deer here, and we've got roses growing out. It's this nature idea again. And we've got some kind of panther or something hanging out just in the alleyway, and the electrical lights in the darkness. I think this sums up Alec's vision of Bastionland really well.
So, just in terms of favourites here, there aren't many. I didn't want to put in loads of special rules. I didn't want every failed career to come with some special mechanical, like sort of class ability style thing. But I've had a few where they do that. So the fashionista is a really one that came really early on. And if you have a fashionista failed career, then you're deprived if you don't dress without if you dress without making a statement, you are deprived. And so you have to wear fancy clothes if you want to be able to function properly. And the fringe investigator is one of the only other ones, because it's this idea that it's a cliche, but it's fun and it works. That, you know, you're an investigator by day, and then you get obsessed with the case so much that you need to do something to take your mind off it. So the classic is that they're an alcoholic in secret or something like that. But here I wanted to have it as an opportunity. So it's not that you're going to be hindered if you don't do this thing, but, you know, if you eat some fruit pie, then you're going to restore your charisma. So it's like a leisure. It serves the same function as leisure activity for other characters, or going out and getting drunk. And my favourite one is brooding. So you can go and brood on a rooftop for an hour, and that will restore your charisma. And brain jar. I dread to think how many things in jars there are in this book. It's something that I overuse a lot because it's cool. Brain in a jar in D&D is a great monster, but here you've just got the potential to create your own brain in a jar, just what everybody wants to do. Goosecar says for Intergalactic Bastionland, I envisage some Troika-esque spheres. Well, I know that Troika took a lot of inspiration from Planescape, and Planescape is certainly the way that I'm thinking for that. I think Planescape is probably the closest analogy. I won't go into it too much now. I'm going to be doing a little bit of revealing about that as I go on, but the idea of something very structured. So all of the elements of the world reflect Bastion in some way. So Deep Country is in many ways the opposite of Bastion. And the Underground shares a lot in common with Bastion, the way that it's we'll get to it as we get to that section, but a lot of the touchstones between Bastion and the Underground are kind of looking at the same thing from two different angles. But one of the examples I sort of had in mind for the Living Stars is that whereas Bastion appears to be order, there's like a veil of order hiding all the chaos. Whereas the stars are, it appears to be chaos, but they're sort of deeply structured and deeply ordered at their core, almost like to a mechanical level. But we'll get to that another time. So, we're nearly there. So the Disinherited Socialite. I love this face just vomiting out stuff. It's not explained. I don't want to know what's going on, but I love it. So some of the failed careers put the failure element right at the front. So this explains what happened straight away. You were disinherited. And it gives you something to lash onto straight away. So it suggests that you have a family. So you're not going to be a lone wolf character without family. You've obviously maybe gone your separate ways to your family, but as this character grows, you've got a hook that you can go back to if you want to say, well, I'm going to reach out to my family. Or maybe the conductor will pull on that family as antagonist characters. So what I found is when I was writing these careers, sometimes I would find that I was duplicating stuff. So I had a lot of wheelbarrows early on. I had to go through and take a lot of wheelbarrows out. And something that I came upon twice, I sort of independently wrote the same oddity twice, is this cursed doll. So it's obviously a voodoo doll. Because it's something that people just understand. And that's the kind of oddity I really like to tap into. It's something that we all remember from our childhood stories about voodoo dolls. And, you know, in that time when I was younger, I think I probably thought, oh, this must be a real thing that people can do. So I try to tap into as much of those touchstones as possible where people might remember a time when they perhaps thought this could be real. And then you've got an obvious reference with 1 HP. The unstoppable rod is obviously the other side of the coin to the immovable rod that I spoke about before. So we'll do one last career, and then I'll answer any questions if they catch up with time. The Verminator. And what I love about this one is, again, you've got a lot going on in this sort of pile of vermin. And I didn't notice this at all. Originally, I just thought I saw these few rats down here, and I sort of didn't look at this shadow up here. And the fact that you've got people watching as well. People watching this act happening. It's a scene that raises a lot of questions. And again, I keep saying about these questions, but that's what I want out of a setting. I want a setting that gets you thinking and gets you thinking about possibilities. I don't like a setting that feels like it's already had its most interesting questions answered. I like there to be little questions that will crop up and you can come up with an exciting answer. So all of the oddities that this Verminator is going to get are animal based. So you've got a very obvious reference that is repeated. Anyone that's familiar with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay will see large and peaceful dog. A contrast to the small but vicious dog, obviously. But it's the only animal that you can tolerate. But then all the other things are just weird bugs that you've got. So again, it's blurring the line between oddities don't have to be these objects. It doesn't have to be this is a machine that came from space. Sometimes an oddity is just a weird bug and you can carry it around with you and it'll do something cool. So I think we'll leave it there for today. So we got to page 37, so at this rate we're going to be doing like 10 episodes of this, but I think I've covered a lot in those first few pages that I won't need to go over again.